everyone, and welcome to the Cartus Forum, What's Happening in the Temporary Housing Arena. My name is Jackie Charney. I'm a Director in Supply Chain Management at Cartus, and I will be your moderator for the next hour. I'd like to begin with a little housekeeping before we start today's session. So this webinar is being recorded, and we'll make it available to you after the session. All attendees will be in listen-only mode for the entire event. At the end of the session, if we have time, we'll be opening it up to the audience for Q&A. If you have a question in reference to today's topic, you can submit it through the chat function. And feel free to direct your question to a specific panelist if you'd like. And don't forget, your question will be viewable by all attendees. So with that, let's get started. Our panel for today. Joining us in this webinar will be Felicia Tillell, President from Oasis Corporate Housing, Kara Peshko, Vice President Strategic Alliance Global Mobility from National Corporate Housing, and Claire Berry, Vice President Sales for EMEA and APAC Synergy Housing, as well as my colleagues from Cartus, Karen Marlborough, Director Strategic Business Development, and Luann Derrick, Director Global Talent Mobility, who will join us throughout to provide color on current prospects and clients and experiences within the temp living arena. I'll let each of them speak to their roles and experience. In the meantime, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. Globally, all areas of supply chain have been impacted in some way, and today, we'll take a deeper dive to look at how our clients and transferees can be better equipped for the challenges we face in the temporary living arena. During this session, our panel of experts will share their experiences of the current temp housing landscape, which will include best practices for companies to follow when scheduling future moves, top tips for your relocating employees using temporary accommodations, and ways our suppliers are approaching the current challenges. So with that, let's get started. The first question I'm going to direct to Claire. With all of the challenges over the past years, what do you feel was the most challenging for your company, and what was the impact, and how are you working to improve upon this area?
Hi, everybody. Wow, goodness, what a difference a year or so makes. I mean, so much has changed, and we focus on looking forward. The great news is that with the relaxing restrictions and growing confidence, the excitement that we see to travel again, business is well and truly open for all of us, which is great. And how long did we actually wait to be back in this position again? So it's truly tremendous. We just need to look at the corporate airline rebound, with American Airlines, for example, leading the way now at 94% back to their 2019 capacity in H1 of 22. So pretty impressive. However, the rapid return, whilst very exciting for all of us and exciting for business, has produced and is producing its challenges in multiple key cities globally for both extended stay and also permanent housing. We see, for example, the operators in hotels being pressed to open more rooms, more floors, bring back valued service touches, for example. And when coupling this with staff shortages that we see, this remains tough for the hotel industry. And it adds further interest and consideration for alternatives and alternative accommodations, such as this sector. So good news for us. And as we look around the world, it's also in Europe, for example, the geopolitical crisis. The crisis has further complicated the real estate in many cities. Particularly, it's impacted Germany, for example, cities such as Munich, Stuttgart, Berlin. But it's also impacted areas such as the UAE. So particularly, which emerged as a haven as Russian sanctions were tightened. Poland, one of the most economically developed countries in Eastern Europe, and Warsaw, Krakow, Wrocław were already an attractive proposition beforehand to corporations ahead of the Ukraine and Russian conflicts. Traditionally, it's had high salaries, low housing prices, very attractive. But naturally, this has also changed in 2022 with prices skyrocketing and demand exceeding supply. Jackie, we're receiving requests daily for extensions to temporary housing as transferees cannot find permanent housing. And ultimately, this is driving families into considering alternatives such as other towns and cities outside. We see this trend continuing. Dublin, Singapore, Tokyo, New York, NorCal, London. It's most key cities now, and I'm sure we're all going to touch on this today. But let's agree that certainly we know there's a shortage. And we envisage that this will continue as we look to the trends. And certainly we see things like exception reports that we have to produce are longer now probably than ever. That's the reality. Fixed pricing set a year ago results in fewer options for clients today, or having to consider lower standards compared to what they're used to. At the end of the day, suppliers are looking to make up for past lost revenues, as are so many businesses, not just temp housing. I think, that falls to, without saying. So what we see with these, with these challenges, and one point in economics would be that as we see and as we're affected by supply and demand and inflated leases and utilities, etc., rates go up. And certainly in some cities at a pace that we've never seen before. I know New York is definitely going to come up today, 100%. It's understandable to some degree that rates have increased. Almost every business has seen a rise in operational costs, and we don't foresee this stopping anytime soon. But ultimately, I know what you're thinking. Okay, we know this. What are you going to do about it, right? So what can we do? And the most important thing is we have to do this together. And a lot of it comes in the planning. We know the issues exist. So how do we help one another ease that pain to promote as frictionless experience as possible? It really comes down to, and I know it's easier said than done in some instances, but it does come down to the earlier you plan, the easier it becomes. Essentially, we have to look at capacity planning. So what does that mean? Forecasting. What are the plans ahead? What are the volumes? Dates. If we look at graphs in the past, it always followed the same bell graph. That graph today has changed. We have to consider dates. We have to consider realistic budgeting and not just think that what stood once will continue to stand. And then communication on desired locations. Could this be different from the usual? Is there any chance of avoiding some of these cities and going elsewhere? Dublin, Singapore before August, it's tough. We're still getting asked for group bookings in Dublin for July. I'm like, that ain't gonna happen. so, what are the alternatives? And then considering policies, budgets, and expectations just may need to flex. I'm sure that Felicia and Cara have got much more to add on this, but from just as a start, I think that sets the scene.
Thank you, Claire. You made some really good points there. That the whole housing industry is affected, not just temporary living. I think the keys are collaboration and planning. I think those are two really, really important points. Felicia, anything from your perspective that you would like to add?
Yeah, I mean, Claire covered a lot of it, but we're seeing the same thing in key cities, London, Barcelona, Dublin, Zurich, any cities that were impacted by people moving out of Ukraine or Russia are really, really tight right now. We don't see it changing anytime really soon. I don't know how long the market can withstand this. I don't think any of us know. I think the economy is probably going to play a big role in that, and we'll see what comes of that over the next few months. But we're definitely seeing the crunch. And like Claire said, what are you doing about it, right? We have a side to our company that we can strategically go into certain markets and use alternative private inventory that we were able to vet through private landlords. And that's something that we're doing more and more of because there's just so much demand for the inventory that we're all sort of going after. And so we're looking more towards the private side that we can vet and put within our inventory that still follows the parameters of what everybody expects corporate housing to look like. So more and more of that, and just looking at creative solutions, I think, but Claire pretty much nailed it. We all just have to work together. The more lead time, the better. The more communication, the better. The more that we can work together and just really kind of tie in all of our resources, I think that's the way that we get through this. just realistic expectations.
Yeah, thanks, Felicia. And the creative solutions I think are key and an important part of coming up with our solutions. Kara, from your perspective, for National Corporate Housing?
Yes, certainly. I would love to share. And Claire did hit it nail on, and Felicia adding to it. I appreciate that. One thing very quickly, I just want to say it's an honor to be on this panel, especially with these two experts in my industry and our industry, as well as the Cartus relocation experts. So thank you for letting us be a part of this. We are seeing shortages, just as we're seeing it internationally, we are seeing it domestically. Not only with apartment inventory, though, it's also with the quality of the rental furniture, labor shortages, A properties. And by A properties, most of the people on the phone know what I mean, but A properties being best location, most amenities, typically newer product. Getting those desired lease terms is a little harder than it used to be. And products like housewares, we're seeing a lot more restrictions. For example, properties will have limits on how many corporate leases they can have in any one given period of time. This is more US domestic. It's not only that we may not have the apartment availability, but it's also making sure we can get it furnished in time, get the cable services done in time. You know, we recently had a challenge where we had a group move in and we had a 2-week delay, I believe, in cable. And that's because they're short of workers. It's not just us, it is everybody. So when you look at that, it's, you know, it's impacting all of our businesses. What we're trying to do to combat the inventory shortage is we are taking long-term leases. For example, New York City, we've recently taken 70 apartments in one building in Midtown called 888. This enables us to have that inventory on a permanent basis. We also have one person dedicated to work with property management companies. This is our supply chain manager. He works with them to build on those relationships. So when we come to them with needs, they're hopefully more likely to work with us, right? They're more likely to work with us on desired lease terms for those short and that long-term business.
Thank you, Kara. That's some really, really good information on the inventory perspective there. Thank you. Let's go on to our next question. I'm going to direct this one to Claire. So we're all really lucky enough to have panelists covering most areas of the world. So adopting a regional perspective, what changes have you made and with how your company delivers its services to meet the current market demands and challenges?
Yeah, great. I mean, that's a great question, and it's something that I think every company, not just within our industry, but everybody's had to face. And we recognize that technology is certainly an enabler for innovation. But in our business, in mobility, our job is to really make the unfamiliar familiar. And I know that Cartus counters also receive more questions now than ever before. And chatbots do not replace being powered by people. And therefore, I think number one, really, to ensure that we deliver services beyond expectation comes down to attracting, retaining, and growing our talent. We're nothing without the talent in our business. So there has been a significant talent drain in hospitality. Specifically, remember, we of course had Brexit as well. And whilst Synergy, we didn't furlough during the pandemic, we actually hired during the pandemic. This is certainly something that has affected many, many businesses. So we have significantly invested in various fast-track talent programs, removing the need for degree qualifications, for example, in our CVs, and also just to be considered a successful candidate. In years gone by, you know, a degree or some certain qualification was a minimum requirement. We don't expect that anymore. For us, it's more about the person. It's more about, do they fit with our culture and do they fit with our clients' culture? So that was number one, was people. I'd say secondly, around, we recognize that a hybrid workforce is here to stay. That's not going anywhere soon. I mean, I'm delighted, I think so many of us are, that I don't have to stand on the train platform every day commuting into work. So I'm all for the hybrid workforce, but it's here to stay. And the way that we live, the way that we work, has changed with that. So previously, for example, the most frequent in-apartment question was whether or not there was a gym. Today, that's not what operations are asked, right? Today, it's more about, what about the work area? Is it catered for in our apartment? Is it adequate? Not just does it have a desk, but is it adequate to work comfortably in an ergonomic environment? So we therefore had to pivot, not just for ourselves and as an operator, but really through our supply chain. And so that we could deliver for Cartus and their suppliers peace of mind that, yes, it's equipped for today's world, in that apartment setup, in that work from home setup, as and when is needed. That's quite a big shift. It seems normal now, right? We would expect that. But that was a big shift. That wasn't always the case 2 years ago. So that's been a change from us from an operational standpoint. And then this is something that Cara touched on. Whose business we are termed a sort of hybrid model. We're a company which both operates apartments, and we also have a supply chain, which is essential for the success of our business. In many markets, supply chain occupancy is at capacity. And I know Cara mentioned this with her new building in New York, for example. And so we've done the same as far as increasing our apartments also in New York, NorCal, London, Dublin, Munich, to meet this demand. And this has served us well. It serves us well during a hot market. It's essential that we have flexibility when we do something like that, because you never know when the market could shift, could go the other way. So we need to ensure that we're flexible. Otherwise, that can go pretty badly pear-shaped if we don't manage that very carefully. But we have to do something to manage rate elasticity and availability for your clients. And that for us has served us very well in this market. The client's expectation is that we still find a solution. We can't blame the market for not doing our job or not fulfilling their issue, or they're expecting us, between Cartus and Cartus's suppliers, the three of us, they're expecting us to find solutions. So those are some of the things that we have done. I just wanted to also bring up Dublin as an example. I know that Dublin is hot on so many people's lips. It's a nightmare at the moment. I mean, let's make no bones about it. It was interesting, a statement in the Irish Times last month was that the solution to the issue, the crisis, was to either cut the population through mass emigration or build more homes. Simple as that. And that was David Williams saying that the state has completely lost control of the housing market, with property prices up, 20% on the year. That's not new for Dublin. That's not any surprise, but of course it's been exacerbated after Brexit. Dublin has become even more attractive, low corporation tax, etc. We know what the attractions are. But simply put, insufficient construction of residences isn't enough to provide the supply and meet the demand. But the good news is that we have seen an increase. It's about 1,000 plus units have come into the market in Dublin in the last 2 years. We've had Becklock, Zanzibar, Stay City, etc. Still doesn't meet our demand, but at least it is a move in the right direction. But also we need to look at the permanent moves. So whilst we're now here talking about temp housing today, I'm sure, Cartus, that you are constantly faced with challenges. What do we do with permanent housing? And what do we do with household goods that are delayed in shipping, etc.? So we're also seeing a continued request for extensions, more so than ever. And of course, with that, those are not guaranteed. So when we're considering, or when you are considering your extended stay, in the past, maybe you were a little conservative because considering cost, and you don't really necessarily want to consider paying for something that maybe you didn't need and you could always extend. That may be a reconsideration for today. You might want to make sure you're safer than not, because no extensions are guaranteed. And then the other thing, just before I wrap up on this, is around, again, the viability of rotational units. So where there's a demand in a market that you can guaranteed fulfill those units, does a corporation consider taking on their own units, whatever number is, is secure for you and you feel is safe and that is guaranteed to be to most degree full, and take on your own units and then rotate your guests or your transferees through those units in really tough and challenging markets. That's another option. In the past, companies don't want to carry that risk. They want the risk to sit with us. But today might be something in the hot months and in the hot markets that may be a consideration.
Claire, thank you. You covered so much in that, right? People and talent, hybrid workforce, and how that's changing what's important to the customer. Dublin, which we've all worked really hard on, and extensions, rotational, lots of good information. Kara, what about you from a U.S. perspective?
Claire mentioned the housing pricing, right? In Dublin specifically. I will share with you that in the US, it is the same, as we all know in this phone call. The housing price is rising. People, the demand for the houses, right? And for rental property as well. She also mentioned flexibility. She mentioned rotational units. And that's one thing I wanted to touch on as well. You know, being able to help a client when they have a need in a specific area, they know they're going to have a need. They know that they're going to have needs over and over again. That's where you need to look at, hey, how can we help you gain inventory and make sure that you have the apartment availability that you need for your guests, for your transferees. One of the other things we're doing, just to touch on a little bit, having our own sourcing platform, you know, using it internally for automation of processing leads and making sure we're getting the bookings, because what that is doing is that's creating efficiencies for our team while enhancing the client's experience. I mean, that is most important. Also, as we mentioned before, and Claire mentioned it as well, taking on multiple apartment lease terms. I talked about the New York City building, but we also have a building in Central London. We have 70 apartments now with West London Apartments, and we acquired a company in Dublin called Scandic that has over 60 apartments in inventory. So we do see this as a chance for us to be able to fulfill those needs that our clients have.
Thanks, Kara. Felicia, from Oasis's perspective, and maybe a little bit on LATAM.
Yeah, from an international perspective, we have really focused on growing our private inventory as a solution to this. That's been key for us. The private inventory side of our company started predominantly throughout Latin America and then started to expand throughout EMEA. And now we're looking at strategic markets globally and expanding into the US. So that's been huge for us to have something that we can offer that is still attractive to clients in the city centers where they want to be at a better, maybe not the price point that they want to be at, but a much better price point than some of the other options that we're seeing in the market. So that's been really key for us to really focus a lot of our efforts on growing that side of our company and really focusing on looking at these markets that we can make a big difference in. In addition to that, like Kara said, we're also utilizing our internal sourcing platform, adding and vetting as many suppliers as we possibly can, as fast as we can in these markets, so that we are able to have supply to go to. It's always helpful to get quick responses, to have quick decisions made, because even with an infinite amount of suppliers, which I know we wish we all had, they still go fast. So making a quick decision is really key. Another thing that we've done is we've more than doubled our staff internationally and domestically, actually, but internationally we've added people throughout Latin America, throughout EMEA, in APAC, and throughout the Middle East as well. So that's given us the ability to be a little bit more strategic when we're looking for new supply and new suppliers, and to be able to vet that as well. So we're looking at it from all those different angles and just trying to implore all the creative resources that we can in order to get as much supply that makes sense for our business.
Nice. Thank you. Let's move on to our next question. Kara, I'm going to direct this one to you first. Are there any trends in the types of accommodations emerging regionally or globally?
Right. Thank you, Jackie. Well, I will say this, holding inventory instead of giving it back is probably all of our ultimate, right, of what we're trying to do to have that availability. There are apartment buildings coming on board that have different levels of service, from unfurnished short-term and long-term options to furnished apartments. Lower cost. I think someone mentioned lower cost earlier. I hate to say this, but it doesn't really exist in major markets today. There's always housing for all traveler types, but with the push on demand for lower cost, it's hard to find. When we do find that lower cost housing, it's usually very basic and without all the checks and balances that we would prefer to have in place. We're finding that the guests are looking for an experience, looking for unique solutions. An example of this, a crazy example, but an example of this is a project group in Minnesota. They rented out campers because they could not find housing in the area where they had their work. But they wanted that experience and they didn't want to have to drive the long distance from the temporary living apartment. So they rented out campers. Today, our clients are looking at B properties. I mentioned A properties before, the best of the best. B properties are still nice. They may not be as new. They may not have as many amenities. They may not be right beside your office building, but they're still viable housing options. Clients want technology, but technology can take that personal touch out of relocation. And lastly, we need to remember the goals with the employee experience during what is usually a difficult time during their relocation.
Yeah, I'm listening to the technology and taking the personal touch out. I think that's of course always important to keep in mind. And there are a lot of solutions out there, a lot of different solutions. It's just a matter of what's important to the customer and the client. Claire, what about you and Synergy on this question?
Yeah, I mean, if I look at this, it's interesting. It's not necessarily specific to Synergy so much as what we're seeing as an industry. And as we look at sort of the trends of the accommodation that we're starting to see, the apart hotels are becoming super popular, particularly in Europe. They're great for consistency with group bookings, for example, ease of arrivals, that type of thing. It is important to note that with this type of accommodation, you are then really looking at the competition from leisure guests as well as corporate and families. So traditionally, for example, the longer you stayed or as a loyal corporate, the more frequently you returned, the lower the rate. But now when you're competing with leisure guests, it's really specifically to looking at ADR. Short-term ADR, for example, average daily rates, and as companies are looking to really recover from past revenues, there is a real firm focus on daily ADR. So it's a great option. It can produce rate challenges, but a superb option, and we're seeing more and more of this coming to the market as we look at product consistency, looking at new product that we see coming to challenging markets, as I was mentioning in Dublin, for example. So that's great. I'd also say that there's more of an openness today to consider alternative accommodations. Whereas before, the expectation was really, you wanted the typical standard serviced apartment. I definitely think there's a much more open-mindedness around that now. And there is more consideration around things like co-living, for example. Co-living, of course, took a dip during COVID. Of course it did. It was like definitely not, first prize during COVID. But as we recover from that, and we look at things like interns and the experience that they might like and the way that they like to live, actually the co-living has been a really fantastic solution. Smaller living spaces, but certainly really fantastic, gorgeous communal areas. So yeah, just a real openness now to considering other alternatives that we see coming to market.
Timing is everything. Clara, thank you for that answer. I recently got a question on co-living as well, so I think that's interesting, right? Depending on the demographic and the guest population. Mm-hmm. Felicia, what about you in response to trends and types of accommodations that are emerging regionally or globally?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of the same. I think Claire and Kara mentioned even, getting trailers or something like that in order to be closer to the workspace. We're seeing some of the opposite of that too, though, where because these city centers tend to be so tight and so difficult for people to find the type of property that they want. We're getting a lot more requests for areas that are just outside of this city center and maybe a secondary market. So people are working more of a hybrid business model. So they're working from home. The biggest trends that we're seeing is the office setup in the apartments. But they're working from home some of the time, and so it's not as much of a commute. So moving a little further away from their office hasn't been as much of an issue. So we're getting a lot more requests for the more semi-remote markets. So we've seen a huge increase in the request for office furniture, but also outdoor space, just to have some more, ability to be outside while they're working from home, or to have that as an option. We have seen some requests for vacation rental type properties, Airbnb or VRBO. We typically avoid booking these options just as a company decision on our part, just because they aren't vetted. It's really difficult for us to vet a property like that, because we're not allowed to get in to do our pre-arrival checks. You're not allowed to talk to the owner before the property is booked, those types of things. But we are starting to see some of that. And so that's where, getting creative in a safe way where we can really manage duty of care and everything else that's really important to our industry, is a focus for us to be able to deliver without having to take those risks.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Felicia. Yeah, I totally concur with that.
A very good point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of your answer dovetails very nicely into the next question. So Felicia, I'm gonna direct this one to you. What about challenges in securing housing in remote locations, for unique needs, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it compared to the challenges that we're facing in key markets right now, remote markets are kind of a breeze, because there's just more availability, and the pricing isn't what we're seeing in key markets. We have, as an industry, and especially us as a company, we've always worked really well within remote markets. And so it's something that I think will become a little bit more of the norm as we move through this tight inventory world that we're living in right now. And so, yeah, like I said, we're getting a lot more requests from that. We're exploring that a lot more. We're getting strategic. Our team is actually proactively identifying options in some of these markets that are just outside of these major areas that are really tight. And so that's been really working well for us. And it really is easier to find the housing that we need in the more remote markets. So it hasn't been as much of a challenge as some of the other things that we're facing. The areas where that is not the case is obviously Eastern Europe, where we're still dealing with the Ukraine overflow and people coming in to those areas. That still can be a little bit tricky, but for the most part, it has not been a problem.
Yeah, yep, understand, and we appreciate being able to secure housing in some of those more challenging locations. Claire, what about you?
Yeah, I love what Felicia said there. Yeah, they're becoming a breeze. They were always the headache in the past. I would say, embrace the differences, be open-minded. Some of these areas may not be what you're used to, but, that's all part of the fun of seeing the world. So I think that, those are the exciting inquiries that we receive. And the style may probably, or will probably, be different to what you're used to. Logistics are not going to be what you expect at best. But Cartus offers a great service in preparing transferees for what to expect. Not to say that there won't still be surprises, but in many remote locations, there may not be service departments as you know them. You may be staying in alternative accommodation types, as we mentioned. I would like to mention India at this point, India is a hot topic right now. It is not easy. It was completely closed for business for the past couple of years. We knew it was coming. All right. It was a hurry up and wait at one point. And it was bubbling. It's been ripe for opportunity for some time. It's not an easy market to do business in at all if you don't have experience. I'd say even if you look at, due to internet and broadband issues, other challenges, even working from home is unappealing. And therefore, convergence on RTO, major corporates have a lot of pending new hires, hundreds, even thousands for some clients of moves to return to office. So it's interesting. And the reason I find India so interesting is due to the extremities in expectation between the intra-regional moves and the international movement. It's very unique. There's an incredibly wide variance of quality of product, of rates to match. It's definitely a dynamic region for us, which is tremendously challenging, but also super exciting at the same time. So yeah, we're very excited for India. I know a lot of companies are starting to expand there. It's good news for us as we look at, they are challenging markets currently for some reasons. Others not, obviously some cities are more challenging than others. We look at areas such as Tel Aviv. That's an interesting one. That's becoming a hot property. Can be challenging because, of course, in high seasons we've got leisure and tourism, etc., and they're not best set up for necessarily the huge increase that we've seen for demand in temp housing. So that's an interesting one. Following Ukraine, as I think Felicia just mentioned now, this brought about a great amount of families from Ukraine and Russia with interest there. So that's been an interesting one to watch on the horizon. And then we have these other cities that are certainly not, tertiary markets by any stretch of the imagination. They are right in line with the top markets in the world, but challenging still. We look at Singapore. Certainly, it's been everybody's #1 market in Asia Pacific for years. It always has been, and I'm sure for a little while it will continue to do so. But it's still a tough market for the reasons that we mentioned. Tokyo, same thing. Just shortage of demand, of supply with huge demand. So yeah, I mean, when we could look at more of the remote markets and the challenging markets, etc., those are challenging, even though they're not remote. But I would say these are the exciting. I agree with Felicia. This is the exciting area. And what's at the moment we see as perhaps a remote location, it's not going to be long before we see them in our top 10.
Yeah, I would agree. Things are changing, and thank you for covering India. That is absolutely one of the hot locations. Kara, anything to add from a U.S. perspective?
Yes, absolutely. Claire mentioned setting expectations. And I think that's something we need to reiterate over and over and over again. We need to set the right expectations when our clients are looking at remote locations. National, for example, and I know the other two companies on the phone today as well, we take careful consideration in vetting properties, right? We've had 21 years experience securing major markets and securing remote locations. When we have that less than A property, when we have a B property, let's say in a remote location, we ask for the employee, if they are in the area, if they could please go and tour the property. Or if there's another employee that's already at the location, if they could tour it for them, just to make sure they are happy with the product. We use our destination services business here in the States. We've had great success recently using that model with VIPs on extensive budgets. We also had a group move actually into UK City, where we used our destination services team in conjunction with Home Finders and Real Estate Network to put together a unique housing program outside of the normal service department operators in the areas. So setting those right expectations with the transferee up front is more important than ever in the current situation with low supply and demand.
Thanks, Kara. And let's change direction just a bit here and talk a little bit about what corporate housing operators are doing in terms of making their units more environmentally friendly. How is this measured? Kara, let's start with you on this one.
Great, thank you, Jackie. Sustainability, right, is more important than ever. At National, we have an initiative called One Tree Planted. This is a start, right, for us. We plant one tree for every corporate housing reservation 30 days or longer. In 2021, we planted 10,000 trees. And first quarter of 2022, we've planted almost 3,500 trees. We also gave our clients trees for Christmas gifts, for holiday gifts last year by planting them in areas impacted by the many forest fires. Some things that we're currently looking at and our industry is looking at for the apartments: reusable grocery bags in the units, energy efficient light bulbs, regulating temperature, reusable water bottles in units instead of using plastic water bottles, or box water instead of plastic. Any leftover food in the apartment after departures could be donated to a local food pantry instead of tossed. Housekeeping, reducing the toxic cleaners they're using, having paper-friendly apartments. You know, in the past we would have, here's your welcome letter and paper, and here's your inspection forms, etc. Instead of leaving those in the apartments now, we make sure they're on an app or in an email. The overall infancy for our entire industry, you know, it's young with understanding what the broad impact is of all of this. For example, most firms do not have anyone exclusively dedicated to this. Some have it aligned with marketing, some have it aligned with operations. Most are just trying to address what I mentioned before, what's in the apartments. But that doesn't really move the needle materially. We do not have the scientists on payroll that can help us, right? So we did research the best organization that could guide us. And like Cartus, we've joined the UN Global Climate Compact. We're just getting started in our journey with them, but look forward to the framework guiding the path. In the meantime, we're going to continue to participate in One Tree Planted and also look at whatever other standards we should adopt or use for universal measurements.
Thanks, Kara. You went over, great initiatives around sustainability and the environment. Claire, what about you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, everyone has the best intentions here. And it's certainly an area where we shouldn't compete, right? But just rather share best practices, collaborate what we learn, try and take the quickest route to market if it's at all possible, rather than everybody starting from the beginning. We've made incremental changes, of course, with plastics, microbeads, etc., what's in the apartments. But really, our focus at the moment is around our supply chain. How do we bring them on the journey with us? How do our clients, how can they become better eco-conscious citizens by the choices they make through our sub-suppliers? And how do we make that easy, that choice easy? So that's one of the areas we're looking at. The other thing I think that's taken up most of our time is really looking at how do we measure and manage our output when it comes to our carbon footprint. So I'd say our biggest challenge has been to really find a line in the sand by which to benchmark so that we can really drive our science-based target. We used actually 2019 as a benchmark. Of course, you know, 2020 and 2021 wouldn't have been an effective benchmark for us. So we're comparing against 2019. We absolutely needed assistance with that. We've done a really nice job of collating all of our data. We have used a third party for that to help us. We needed experts. We were not equipped to do this at all. So we brought experts on board. It was probably over a year ago now. We spent that time really collating all of our data that we could to find that line in the sand so that we can actually make a pledge, a science-based pledge for 2030. So we can now confidently pledge what our target is to be carbon neutral by 2030, along with our incremental steps on how we are actually going to effectively get there and avoid any kind of greenwashing marketing tactics. So a lot of work has been done, but we've certainly needed help on it.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, interesting. Both you and Kara mentioned, enlisting the help of a third party there, and I think that's great. You go to the experts. Felicia, what about you on this question?
Yeah, we're in the same boat. We're currently actually interviewing third parties to determine who to move forward with. But we've had an internal committee for a while, for the last 3 3 or 4 months, we've been starting to pull together some other industry partners within temp housing, but also within household goods and other different areas of our industry to collaborate on what their companies are doing so that we can all share best practices. Like I think Claire said, there's no reason for us to compete in this area. We all just should be doing as much as we possibly can. Another thing that we do is we give preference to providers that can offer green solutions. Our platform allows us to be able to indicate if it's a green solution, and we can give preference to that, you know, in certain ways when we present it to the client. So that's something that we also encourage our suppliers to be able to employ as much as they can within their units to make them as green as possible to get the more preferential treatment for within our platform. So more to come on that with our initiatives too.
Good. That's really cool that you can track that. Okay. Here's a question I think that you know, our one of the things our audience might be waiting for. Claire, I'll start by directing this one to you. Is there anything we can do from a temporary living industry perspective to maximize our opportunity to secure housing?
So I would say yes, there definitely is. We spoke about communication and engagement, but what I would say on that is, don't worry if all the exact plans are not 100% in place and all the ducks are not in a row. That's okay. The earlier we get the wheels in motion to gauge availability, advise perhaps of current trends in the market at that time, that's where we can really help, along with Cartus, to guide and manage expectations. Might not always be good news, but at least we know what we're in for together, right? So I would say don't necessarily wait until everything is in place. The sooner we know of things, the better, and the sooner we can all start planning. This will also help alleviate some of those inflated last-minute prices that we've been, you know, faced with recently. The sooner we can start booking, or even if we can put a couple of things on hold, etc., we can at least help alleviate some of those last-minute inflated rates. Secondly, I'd say be patient. Due to new hires, onboarding of new teams, they may not be at full capacity, or they may not be as experienced as in the past. Searches may take a little longer because availability is more scarce. So I would say anticipate longer lead times for a response. The work now has to sometimes be doubled or tripled to be able to find the answers that you need, just because of the market being so tight. So I would say expect a little longer, but as long as we're doing a good job of telling you the incremental steps that we're taking, and we keep you and Cartus up to speed and the counselors up to speed with what we're doing, I think that's important. We are also experiencing far more questions from travelers and transferees as their confidence rebuilds. Again, you know, that takes time. But equally, I'm going to counter that point, because when we do find solutions, or we do offer options, and it comes to making decisions around those options, I would encourage you or your secondees to be as quick as possible. So now we counter that, be as quick as possible in getting back to the counsellor on your preferred choice. And better still, even better still, would be perhaps a first choice, a second choice, and third choice in order of preference, so that if the first one is not available, at least then we can just automatically move forward with the second without having to go back and forth, etc. So I would say, where it comes to availability, it's important to note that options are not held. So when you are provided with options, it is a case of quickest to the buzzer, that, you know, it is not being held for 48 hours, 72 hours whilst decisions are made. It is still open to the market. And so that's why it's imperative to just really come back as quickly as possible with maybe those choices in the order of preference. And then lastly, and then I'm sure Cara and Felicia have got some great points to add on it, but I'd say flexibility in location. Perhaps, you know, could my apartment be above the 3rd floor, or can it be a 10-minute walk of our child's nursery, or I don't want to make a switch on the tube for example, I don't want to change lines on the tube, for example. We need those days were great. They're not here today. So in order for us to be able to present as many options as possible, a little bit more flexibility in requirements and location would go a long way in such a fast-paced environment. And that will certainly help result in success of finding something that's sufficiently suitable.
Thank you, Claire. Great answer. Felicia, what about you as far as maximizing the opportunity to secure housing? What are some of your thoughts around that?
I don't know that there's much more to add. I think we've covered this a couple of times throughout this panel discussion. Claire just covered it a lot too. The more patience you can have, the more flexibility that you can have, the more lead time you can give us, and the quicker the decisions will all be key, because all of these options for really any options that any of us are offering are being marketed through several channels. And so not only are they not being held, but we don't actually know what channel they're going to be picked off from. And so they go really, really quickly, just, because of the state that we're in. So those are really the key things to just really kind of drive home a little bit more. That's about all I can add to that. Yeah.
Thank you. Kara, any last minute comments on that one before we move over to our last question?
They hit it. It is about the flexibility. The one thing I will say is, and I keep saying over and over, we keep doing things over and over again, right? As far as people sending in, hey, here's my lead, this is what I want, bringing back options, nothing fits what they want. They really need to reconsider what they want. Like, is it a true need or is it just wants? We want to be able to give them what they desire. We truly do. But we also want to make sure we get them in an apartment, a nice setting, good location, all of that. Maybe consider, if clients could consider, having choices. When they get the options, they say, okay, I like number 1, 2, and 3, and then giving the relocation consultant the ability to go back and say, hey, number 1, oh, that's taken. Well, here's the second option. So really just, we need to think about changing up the criteria if options provided first go around didn't fit the transferee's needs. Being more flexible, and yes, giving some more lead time would be great. Trying a solution like look at a single business line and, let's see what the results are if you were to take long-term leases just for that specific group, for example. So I think, everything that they said is spot on with what's happening and what we need to do. And just sharing, like today, us being on this webinar and sharing with everyone, what the challenges truly are in the marketplace today.
Great. That's awesome. Thank you so much. All right, we're on our last question, panelists. Claire, I'll start with you. What's the single most important takeaway for our listeners today?
You know what? It's togetherness. To engage our partnership. I think it's about generosity of spirit, right? Cara just mentioned in the approach and how we deliver ultimately the best experience for all parties, each and every one of us. So I'd say togetherness.
I think that's a really, really great message. Felicia, anything for you on the single most important takeaway for our listeners today?
No, I mean, I agree with Claire. I think it's communication, togetherness, just working through this together, and everybody being patient and working together. Yeah, is going to be key.
I echo that. Kara, anything to add, or are you right there with them?
I am absolutely right there with them. And, it's really hard to say that single most important, because it is important. The communication, the togetherness, the setting the right expectations, and making quick decisions when it comes to the options. That is truly important as well. I would add, with all that we've survived this year, we've lived through more than any of us could ever imagine, right? And we've gained in partnership, we've gained in experience, we've gained in preparedness for whatever's next. As an industry, if we, clients and partners, stand together, keep lines of communications open, and collaborate, we've proven we can get through nearly anything our industry or the world has to throw at us.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. Well, I want to say a thank you to each of you for sharing your experience, and I hope all those who joined us on the call really found value in today's session. I'm afraid we've run out of time for Q&A, but we'll look to answer any questions that are in the chat that you've posted, and we'll share the responses so that everybody can see them. We want to make sure that we share our answers to those questions with you. So thank you again, everybody. We appreciate the time and the expertise.